with by others outside of the law. And the law itself should protect people's rights to their persons, their rights to acquire property, and also their justly acquired property. Other than, and this gets a little bit tricky, other than in certain dire emergencies when things may be overridden. But from this perspective, the heart of liberty is security with respect to your person and your property. People who take this view, classical liberals, will clearly wish people to flourish. But their view will normally be that additional duties that you might have to other people over and above just respecting their rights would be, as it were, moral duties rather than something that those people have got a right to. It's desirable, for example, from this perspective, that those people who are fortunate should assist those people who are not. But those other people don't have a right to this assistance, and above all, the state shouldn't compel people to give to those other people. Protection, indeed, of negative liberty or negative freedom, for people who take this view, typically the classical liberals, is the core function of the state. The other view, the welfare liberal view, is typically associated with the notion of positive liberty. The terminology here again goes back to Sir Isaiah Berlin. But what people use that term for now varies a bit beyond what's to be found in Berlin's work. They may say one of a number of things. First of all, they may say negative liberty, simply freedom from interference, is of little use to someone unless they have resources to make use of it. Is the homeless person free? Is the person who's starving free? Well, they're not being interfered with, but that kind of freedom, the argument goes, is of no use to them. Is it really okay to call it freedom? Or doesn't freedom also mean that people actually have a capacity to do things? Second, people who take this more positive view of liberty will typically say that an individual is free only if they enjoy a measure of autonomy. And also that they have the possibility of self-development, including the material and cultural resources that are needed for this. And from this perspective, if you put this kind of notion really at the center of what's involved in freedom, then if someone is badly disadvantaged, if someone, say, is in the US today and they can't read, they don't have that capacity, are they really free? And welfare liberals will often take the view that our very concern for freedom means that people should be protected not just against external aggression and so on, but also that they should be accorded certain kinds of capacities which they may not otherwise have in themselves. A third development of this notion is as to whether people are free, if in a sense they're not properly integrated, they're not properly together. The relevant image here to think of is of someone being unfree who is a slave to their passions. And you have this notion that there may be someone who perhaps suffers from an addiction. They may have an alcohol problem, they may have a problem with cocaine, crack or whatever. And you have here the notion that while they're not suffering any form of external constraint, while indeed they may have quite a lot of resources, they're not in a sense properly free if they are subject to the slavery of their passions. And you have one strand within liberalism, and the positive view of freedom, which says, in effect, there is surely some room here for government at least to give a hand in regard to this kind of matter. And indeed, think of the way in which we have governmental regulations about issues to do with alcohol and tobacco in this context, appealing, I think, very much to this notion that people aren't properly free if they're enslaved to certain kinds of passions. There may be other kinds of utilitarian concerns in the background. But you have this notion there, too, that there is something wrong with the person, something defective, related to their freedom if they are not properly in control, if they're not fully in control. This, indeed, is actually a notion that goes right back to Plato. These ideas are also coupled with the further view that it's the state, the government, that should have an underlying responsibility for securing freedom understood in these wider senses. We'll be looking in the next lecture of what may be said on either side of certain of these disagreements. Our concern here has really been more with an exploration of liberalism. Let me just remind you just what it is that we've done. First of all, we have looked at liberal ideals. Ideals that in a sense can be found to be shared by the two different strands of liberalism. We have looked also at liberal programs, and we'll have seen in this context the way in which markets and so on have loomed large because of the way in which they connect up notions about rights and notions about well-being. They allow, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, in connection with Adam Smith, for the possibility of the division of labour, for the possibility of the coordination of economic activity, the possibilities of moves towards prosperity on a basis of freedom. We also then turned to consider contrasting liberal views about the state. On the one side, the rather austere view that the classical liberal has, the night watchman conception of the state at the core of things, with a few sort of fairly small extensions, but stopping beyond any great expansion of the activities of the state, and contrasting this with the welfare liberals' view of the state, which has the state take on a much greater role. And we saw, too, in the latter part of the lecture, the way in which these things were connected with different views of freedom. To put the matter bluntly here, the classical liberal will say that if people are not being coerced, if people aren't subject to external constraint, they are free, whereas the welfare liberal is much more inclined to say that all kinds of things for which he or she wants to make use of the state are connected up to the core liberal idea of freedom. That you're not just here looking after people's well-being, but you're looking rather after their concerns to do with freedom. Let me give a concrete illustration. I am, I must confess, somewhat overweight. I have, I guess, a problem about diet and eating and so on. It's doing me harm, and I'm pretty weak-willed. Indeed, one could say that not only is my proclivity for eating hamburgers of a certain sort something that is not doing my waistline and my general health any good, but you might also say that at a certain level I'm a bit out of control. I mean, I know that I shouldn't eat the things, but at times I go ahead and do it. And one might think, well, is there not a case for saying that I'm in need of assistance? I mean, it may look kind of crazy, but just think about it. We may say if someone's got a really bad alcohol problem, that there's a case for kind of at least trying to persuade them not to drink. And for the state, say, in Virginia, channeling all sales of hard liquor through its own stores and so on to keep some measure of control over it. With regard to drugs, they're made illegal. With regard to cigarettes, there are various kinds of limitations. Why not, perhaps, add to this some notion of a kind of coupon that you have to give in when you buy a hamburger? And so that anyone, for example, selling me more than my quota can then be had up in court and fined, because clearly it's something which would be good for my health. But it's also something where, insofar as one could genuinely say that I'm here a bit out of control, it may be helping me to kind of restore some sense of integrity and freedom. Now, you may say, look, this is just daft, this is just silly. But there's a sense in which, say, taking the case of cigarettes or taking the case of drugs, we do seem to buy into the argument. Yet at another level, we might seem really rather worried as to whether it is unduly paternalistic and people are being treated inappropriately. And this, in a sense, seems to me, particularly when one concentrates on freedom, to get to the heart of some of the disagreements between different sorts of liberalism. And what we're going to be doing next time is exploring why people hold the different views on this position that they do and what their arguments are on one side or the other.